If you're going to be a winner, you're going to need a coach.
Sharpening doesn't happen by accident. A blade left untouched will rust, and a man left unchallenged will stagnate. Every man needs friction, resistance, and a whetstone to grind away weakness and reveal his true edge. Welcome to the Whetstone, where we reject comfort, disrupt the status quo, and forge men ready for impact. Hosted by Dredd, Dark Helmet, and me, the Plague. This is where men step out of the drift and into acceleration, because iron sharpens iron, and no man sharpens alone.
And we're back. It's not getting any better.
It's like a chicken omelet. It's like a mother and child reunion. Just
I like to partake of the food of every stage of its growth and development.
Yeah, the sock
Have
within the
eggs
sock.
on chicken.
So, Helmet, you were talking about last Christmas. You had a sock in your stocking, sort of a stocking stuffer, if you will.
And the reason that I said that is because it was a joke. I did not have that.
Oh,
So
you
I don't know what we were just joking along. We
Well,
just
but
said
tell us about these socks.
how meta it would be if you got socks in your Christmas stocking, and how it would be kind of like an odd turducken type situation where smaller and smaller socks continue to be crammed in socks. Look, that's really not what we're here to talk about. But I will say this: if you're in the sock market, if you're thinking to yourself, I love my feet, I understand the necessity of having them and having them in good condition, may I commend to you, my friends, the use of a Mudgear sock. Now, I'm going to be very honest. In a day-to-day beatdown, maybe it makes a huge difference. Maybe it doesn't for you. I don't know. Everybody's feet are a little bit different. I prefer them myself for a number of reasons, because things like smell and sweat and moisture wicking and stuff like that. So I prefer them for those reasons. But where they really shine, where I feel like Mudgear socks really shine, is when you're doing the long and difficult things like a seesaw, or a long ruck, or a Spartan race, or any of those kinds of things. And as you know, we've got partnerships now with Go Ruck, we've got partnerships with Spartan, and some of these things that are kind of blossoming up. And so as we continue to participate in these sorts of things out there in the nation, I think it's going to be super important. I used to lose toenails when I would run long distances because the way that my feet would shift, and I don't know if it had everything to do with my socks, but I don't think it hurt. I used to get blisters when I would be on long rucks until I switched socks, and have never had any problem since with a Mudgear sock. And so I think there's a lot of benefits to having them, and I would commend, as I say, or is that the right word? Commend to people, right? Yeah, I would commend to a man.
Recommend.
I would recommend. I would not only commend, I would do it twice. I would recommend it over and over to a man that, hey, life's too short to have crappy socks. Fair? So
Yeah.
go out and grab yourself a pair.
When was the last time you wore a non-Mudgear sock?
To a physical activity, or just in general?
Anytime.
Sunday.
I'm wearing them right now. I was wearing a suit earlier. I'm wearing them right now.
There they are.
Those are.
Those are.
That's a Mudgear sock right there. But no, on Sunday they don't make, to my knowledge, Malco and Mudgear do not make a dress crew sock that would be suitable for a suit on Sunday.
Not yet.
Not yet. But they do make an F3 sock. They do make an F3 sock. So if you're so inclined to get yet another piece of gear with our logo on it to show your dedication and love for the greatest men's movement ever conceived of, then I would recommend you get some of those.
I love it. Helmet, thank you for sharing that. And I'm really glad that you got the toenail thing figured out.
It was terrible for a while there.
Yeah. Well, and I do really appreciate the questions that we're getting. I think guys are listening and sort of leaning in, asking for just more clarification. And so I would just encourage guys, keep reaching out with some of those questions. We love talking through it. And my understanding is we have a really good question today about kind of the subject of divorce. Helmet, I might have you kind of read or paraphrase that for us.
He's a fella out there in the gloom, and he said, hey, I was just listening to the Whetstone, you guys on the Whetstone podcast, and his question was kind of saying, hey, is there any content or any perspective around divorced guys, and obviously there's a number of guys that find themselves in that kind of situation. But and he was saying, yeah, look, it's not that I don't feel included or anything by the nation or even by my local AO or whatever, but I do find myself kind of going, how do I navigate this? And what would kind of be the perspective, and how might we figure out, well, what does my Concentrica look like, because she isn't really there, but the shorties are, whatever. So, and so I think it actually kind of speaks to a couple things. One, obviously there's a gap, there's a hole in the Concentrica if you no longer have an M to whom you are legally and lawfully wedded, right? But it also, I hear questions from guys a lot of times too, saying like, hey, well, I don't have kids, so what do I do? Or, I don't currently have, whatever it is, right? And so maybe another question to ask, the kind of the unasked question is, what do we do when our Concentrica is we find that there's gaps or there's, holes in it, but something like that. I don't know. But, a guy who finds himself, maybe, not his desire to be divorced, but he finds himself in that situation, and kind of what does that mean and how should he navigate that?
So I've had guys ask me that over the years.
Yeah.
I've had guys who were divorced. I've actually had guys who were never married. I've had guys who were married that don't have any kids. And my response to it is the Concentric represents the relationships that a man has if he in fact has them. So if you don't have a wife, so you're a widower or you're divorced, well, you don't have an M. But that doesn't change the way you should treat your children. That doesn't change your shield lock, doesn't change anything other than the fact that you're not, that's a plate. The M plate is one that you're not going to be spinning. And so for a divorced guy, if he says, well, where does my former wife exist in the Concentrica?
Mm-hmm.
And my response is that she just simply does not. Now I am a divorced man, and it's a blessing that my ex-wife and we did not have any children, because I think it would change things drastically. And when we divorced, I don't think I talked to her for 18 years. And one day she left a message on my phone and said, "Hey, can you call me about a deed?" And this is Sue. Her name is Sue. "Can you call me about this deed?" And so I call her back. I thought it was a client, potential client, or a current client I just didn't recognize. I called back. I said, "Hey, it's Dave Redden calling back. Yes, you had a question about a deed." I was happy to help her with what she wanted me to do. But when I think back on that occasion, it occurs to me, if you don't have children in common, you're probably not going to have anything to do with your ex-wife.
There wouldn't really be a whole lot of reason, would there?
My current wife would prefer that I did not, and I'm sure her current husband would prefer that. Although we would both say there's no danger of it. Now,
Fair.
If you have children, I'm sure that the challenges are really different. And I can only speak, of people I've seen, friends I've seen, or clients I've seen who navigated that. To me, there's like two kinds of navigation. Navigation one is you either don't do anything to accommodate your ex, or you go out of the way to antagonize her. That's path one. Seems like path two is you swallow your pride, put your children first, and do everything you can to find a peaceful coexistence. And for the short period of time I was a divorce lawyer, a very poor one, I realized how divorce lawyers make so much money because, I mean, you make money just on the fact that they can't trade the kids off. They have all these crazy, you got to drop the kid off at McDonald's a certain time, 20 minutes late, you're going to court, trying to hold the person in contempt. I mean, all those things are easily circumvented, seems to me, if you just swallow your pride. So she's late. She was late bringing the kid, so I'm going to be equal number of minutes late bringing the kid back. Well, that explains why you're divorced, if that's your attitude. Right?
Yeah. How's that working for you?
Yeah, I mean, Well, but the funny thing about being a lawyer is, in one sense, since we deal with conflict all day long and we know the law, we are generally first in line for not having conflict. I mean, I'm willing to overlook all sorts of stuff in the name of not having another conflict that I have to deal with, like my own. If I can find a way to agree with you, that doesn't require me to, completely
standards or something.
compromise all my long held essential beliefs. If I can find a way, I'm going to do it. And I think that's probably very difficult to do if your wife has left you. Ironically, in our Bible study, we've been going through Hosea and Gomer, the story of Hosea and Gomer. And we were scratching our heads today saying, why in the heck is this even in the Bible? If you don't know that, if you're listening, you don't know the story, it's Hosea is a prophet in Israel, the northern half of the split kingdom of the Jews at the time, the eighth century, I think. And Hosea hears the Lord tell him to go marry Gomer, who is a prostitute. And he marries her, and they have 3 children. And the Lord keeps telling him that the Israelites are like a wayward woman, and they're adulterous, and here's what's going to happen. And it's like we're reading this story. It's like, what is
the message we're supposed to take away here?
Right. But the one thing about it is there's no expression from Hosea saying, you are hosing me. I am being Hosea'd by you, Lord, forcing me to marry a prostitute. Like, he just obediently does it, And I was talking to my pastor this morning about it, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm getting ready to preach about that." I said, "You are? Nobody preaches about Hosea and Gomer, but we're walking through this marriage series in our church. We've been, I think we're on the 3rd or 4th week, and pastor is not saying things like, here's the 7 things you need to do to have a good marriage. Date your wife, blah, blah. None of that. It's just stories from the Bible of basically of men screwing up so far. Like Adam eating the fruit and blaming it on Eve. David not loving Michael the way she loved him, And so, you're sitting there in the pews as a man going, oh, geez, have I done that kind of stuff, So I guess the Hosea Gomer story is going to be a little bit different since he was the obedient one. But all these stories, the reason kind of why I like them is, we were talking about this. I said, if you look at the Bible, it's almost God is almost like a good sergeant in the army. And because a good sergeant in the army, if he's going to teach you something, he always gives you an explanation, a demonstration, and a chance to do practical work on the text. So he explains it. You're sitting there, and he explains it. Then he does it himself, and then he puts it in your hands and says, "You do it." So he says, "Men, this is the M16A1 rifle. Fires from a closed bolt position. It can fire 75 rounds per minute. It has a 30-round magazine." It goes through the whole thing. That was the explanation. And then my recollection is my drill sergeant took the butt of the M16, he put it right up in his crotch, and he pulled the trigger on full auto. And he did that to demonstrate to us that it won't hurt you, which was a pretty,
sounds awful.
Yeah.
Well, it was like, because, many of us had never fired a fully automatic weapon. I'm not sure I'd ever fired any weapon. I'm from a Yankee, so I don't think I ever had. So here's this guy takes the rifle, which is, assault weapon, and he puts the butt in his crotch, and he pulls the trigger, and he goes, "See, demonstration, right?" And then, of course, the weapon's in our hands, and we're firing it. So,
And he said, "Now you do it, but make sure the the business end is pointed down, like
That's right.
I did. Don't do it the other way.
Don't put the barrel in your crotch. So I think God in the Bible, God of the Bible, is constantly giving explanations and then demonstrations, and then you go out and you get the chance to do it yourself. So if you take Hosea, the explanation is, number one, obedience is how we reflect our love for God. And obedience means nothing if you're simply going to do the things he asks you to do that you want to do.
Yeah.
When you do something that causes you to be ashamed and have to set your pride aside, but he says, this is what I want, and you do it, that's true obedience. Now, here's a demonstration. What's the worst thing you can imagine? Me having to marry a prostitute. Worst thing.
Sounds pretty
Right.
bad. Yeah.
Pretty bad. Okay.
Yeah.
There's your demonstration. Now, go out today and see if you are obedient. What you will do when you are asked to do something you wish not to do, that's against your will. And the good news is it will not be marry a prostitute. It might
More than
simply,
likely.
right. It might simply be forgive someone who transgresses against you. Set aside your right to get revenge, or set aside your right for compensation in some way. Like just forgive the guy, right? Small or big. Funny thing is, it's probably going to be small in comparison to Hosea,
To marry
right?
a prostitute. Yeah.
To marry a prostitute.
Yeah.
And then you screw it up the first time, come back around, get another explanation, another demonstration. And so that's the way to me, reading the Bible is very much like it's a very practical thing. Like none of these things exist in a vacuum of here's a crazy story. Nobody knows why it's there, right? I don't think so. I think everything I read, even though it's hard to apply it in the moment, if I can understand it and then I'm kind of patient, then I see it come to fruition, and just the demonstration I received is usually hyperbolic in the sense that we like to say I learned I want to be as patient as Job. Oh, you want your entire family to be killed? You want your livelihood to be taken away?
Yeah.
You want to be
Everything
covered?
you own to be gone, removed.
You want to be
covered
your
in
skin
sores.
covered
Yeah.
with sores and pustules?
Well, not
That's
that
what you
patient.
want.
I don't want to be.
You
that
want your shield lock to come over and say it's your fault?
Isn't that
You
almost
want-
always the way it goes,
Yeah.
though, Dredd?
You want
It's like,
your
I want
right.
this. And then you're like, well, no, not like that.
Not like that.
I want it my way.
Well, right. Well, actually, what's going to happen is you're going to be at DMV trying to get a new driver's license.
Yeah.
I mean,
and watch how you screw that up.
That's right. That's right. So one way, I know this was a huge circle, but coming around, if you are a divorced man, you actually have the opportunity to practice an extreme form of grace, particularly where your wife is the move-it, the one who has decided to depart. And you can exhibit that to the men around you and be a huge blessing and example to them. That's kind of up to you, right? So while you don't have the ongoing transformative relationship between a man and a woman, what we call the M, at the center of your concentric, you certainly have a volume of experiences, failures, and things that you learn from that you can share with other men to help them avoid going down the same path that you've gone. Now,
Whether in
maybe-
a formal Whetstone relationship or not.
or not.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's all God wants from you, to be that. Maybe he wants you to marry again. I don't know. None of us know. But it's not for us to know, right?
Do you as I'm looking at, so the Concentrica, right, is first introduced in Free to Lead, right, is sort of like family ring of, there's ring of 18, ring of 80.
Yeah, right.
So
That idea kind of congealed a little more specifically. You're right, though. You're right. Yes.
we have some guys locally, right, that have never married, don't have kids. And so then it's like all those first two, circles are gone, right? And so then
Right.
does the model from Free to Lead as opposed to the model kind of outlined in Q Source, or is there sort of like, because I remember one time, Dredd, you had just kind of said, well, this is this is the way it worked out in my life, right? But how,
Yeah,
how do
right,
you sort of
right.
guide a guy to like redefine those rings if they're maybe missing or never existed? Or
I just don't think all of us are called to be married.
Hmm.
And obviously, all of us are not called to have children, right? The Q source was more aimed at providing a organized, which is to say, a systematic view of man's life. So to take what we believe and systematize it, organize it,
Mhm.
rather than to have it random, right? So uh, that way it's ordered, and when you face challenges, it aids you in how to handle those challenges.
Yeah.
Like if it's preparedness, say, so we see three different spheres of fitness. So the physical fitness, right? The king, queen, the jester. Relational fitness, that's the concentrica, and godly fitness or spiritual fitness, right? That's the third F, and that these things are
And that's
interconnected.
study still in the first quadrant, right? Study, meeting,
Right.
prayer. I forget what order.
Right. That's right. That's
Okay.
right. That, and putting it in the first quadrant is to say these are the fundamentals. You have to be fit in these three areas, and that fitness usually, or at least in my experience, not usually, my experience, physical, relational, spiritual, in that order. In that order. And that fitness, that get right, the pursuit of proper personal alignment, right? That's what we call it.
Yeah.
That is a conditioned precedent. In other words, you must be that before you can be purposeful, before you can go to the second job, right? Because you can't live right unless you have gotten right. And that's based on my own experiences and my own observations.
And again, the caveat there would just be that with the acknowledgement, yes, gentlemen, before the engineers write in, right? You're never all the way right.
Nope.
It's always a process.
Nope.
But you have to be.
Man, I was looking for the program or the checklist.
I know. You have to be
It's-
mostly have
it's-
gotten right,
right.
before you can really start the process of
Right.
of living right. And,
It's
you're always
not
gonna be
a-
back and forth, and you're gonna be moving through.
Yeah.
So don't get weird.
It's not a checklist.
Right.
There's no merit badges. You know,
That's super. I like flair, man.
yeah, of course. Of course.
Why else would you wear that mustache, Plague?
All right.
I mean,
That's right.
If you didn't like flair.
That's right. That's right. So, and part of it is because, you know, a merit badge is if you get your marriage badge for being able to start a fire without matches within 30 seconds, you've attained that skill. Yeah, everything in the get right has to be constantly reinforced. Like you never, you know, you're never there. You're always working. That's why, you know, when I'm whetstoning is dull it knows, I'll say, are you accelerating or decelerating? Is your M accelerating or decelerating?
Yeah, not.
And
Are you done? Are you done pursuing your M?
Right.
No.
You know, and most guys, when I hit one of those, say, is your M accelerating, decelerating? They say, oh, she's happy. I'm not asking you that.
That's right. Or yeah, they'll sit for a second and go, oh, well, no, things are good.
Things are good. Well, no, I mean, you can be doing a crappy job as a husband and she could be happy.
Still be happy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Likewise, you can be serving her in a godly way, the way God intends us to do so, and she's unhappy. And it doesn't mean your M's decelerating.
Right.
It just means that for what she has her own reasons, right?
Yeah.
So when I address it myself every morning when I pray and I say, you know, about my M, I ask myself, God, show me where I failed to love, honor, protect my wife yesterday. Those three things. Love, right? Love her the way you love me, if you're a Christian. Honor in everything I do, is capturing every thought, right? In the way that I solely focus on her from a sexual nature, right? Honor the marriage and protect. Like, did I protect her? Did I use the strength that you gave me as a man, you know,
emotionally and physically,
to protect her in all ways so that she feels that and she feels protected, right?
Yeah.
And I just ask God to show me, and sometimes he does, right? You had thoughts about her that were not loving. You said things about her to other people, whether it was a joke or not, that exposes her to ridicule. You know, these are just things men do.
Right.
Yeah.
And the like, oh, you call your wife the ball and chain. Well, ha ha ha.
I
Yeah,
don't think
but
that's
see,
funny at all, but yeah.
well, what you're saying to other people, if you say that, is that uh, she is not your suitable helpmate.
Mm-hmm.
She's a
She's a burden.
obstacle.
Yeah.
She's a burden. She's a burden.
And that's, yeah. It's funny. My wife, will often, like, guys will, cause look, I catch a lot of crap. Guys love to pick on me or make fun of me or whatever. But I've said it to them, if my wife's going to be with me at a place or whatever, I warn them ahead of time. Like, hey, a little joking here and there is probably okay, but you have to be really careful of being critical of me in front of my M, because she will light you up. That's just fact. I mean, like, it really makes her mad.
Yeah.
Because she's like, this poor guy pours everything he has, and you guys are going to treat him like that, I'll kill you. So it is kind of funny. She's not quite blowtorch level, Dredge. It's not like that, but
yeah. Don't come at me on Twitter.
I've
I
seen
mean,
blowtorch. She will eat you.
And I'll say to her, that didn't bother me. And she's like, that's because you're a fool. I said, that's what he called me. And she said, I'm the only somebody who can call you a fool.
That's right. I had a really cool sort of, so early on in my recovery, it was great for me, right? Because I had changed. I had stopped using drugs, so I felt amazing, right? But my wife had been through a lot of trauma and was not feeling amazing. She was still like not trusting me, and in the gloom, I was talking about her in a negative way. And thank goodness I had a good buddy of mine, Grills, here in F3 Omaha, just pulled me aside and said, "Hey, man, the way you're talking about your wife is not honoring. It's not who you want to be." And to me, I've given several COTs since then that just like, I need that. We all need that. And if you ever hear me talking about my wife in a way that's dishonoring, I want to know, because that's not who I'm trying to be. But I think there's opportunity for guys, even not in a formal shield lock or whetstone relationship. Like, if you hear one another talking about your M in a way that's dishonoring, I mean, that's, pick each other up in that space.
Yeah. Just not to take us too far back or drag us back in the conversation too far, but as you guys were talking, made me think a little bit more about the question of the divorce and how do you, maybe, are there some practical things, and the way the Dredd was saying, like sometimes you just got to suck it up and, humble yourself and deal with it. And I thought about it. And now look, I will admit I've been married. I've been very happily married for 24 years. Right. And so maybe I'm not the guy that's a disclaimer to say, I don't know what it would be like if I got divorced or if I was divorced. I know what works, in terms of saying, hey, if you can have any kind of amicable relationship with that person, after the fact, and say, the way that my wife and I avoid a lot of conflict or deal with a lot of these kinds of things is we remind ourselves constantly of our shared mission, what it is we are to do. Now, we're still a team, right? So we have, us having missional goals, particularly, with regard to our shorties, with regard to our life together, what it might be, makes sense. I don't know if it would work. So I would kind of throw it out there maybe to, Dredd and whoever is, feel free to, weigh in. But, if you were able to say, hey, our shared mission here now, we're not a team in the way that we were, but we still can be a team with regard to these shorties, because they're still both, I mean, they're going to be ours forever. Like it or don't like it. That's, we're not contractually obligated to them. We are obligated by, by divine providence that they're there, right? You're no longer contractually obligated to her in the same way, but you are obligated to them in a different way. But so I think, having a common focus like that for us, often will help us to avoid conflict over kind of, what might be somewhat silly things, or less important things, because they're non-missional things. They're not moving us toward the advantage that we're seeking together, or whatever. Dredd said you got to suck it up and kind of be humble. And I was thinking, like, how do I do that in my current relationship with my wife now? And that's a lot of the way, right? As I go, you know what, I may be annoyed, I may be frustrated, but it doesn't really matter, because my frustration is non-missional. Now I can talk that through with her, or I can talk through, talk it through with my shield lock, whatever. Right. But that's a way that I think might be helpful, or to think about, or to look at that. I don't know, but that person might not be interested at all in doing that with you. So I, don't know. But even if she's not willing to participate, you can still have your side of it and say, yes, but I know what my obligation is. I know what my mission here is. And her being mad, or her being frustrated, or her, acting like however she's going to act or whatever, and even attempting to damage me or the relationship or whatever, those things don't have to be, they don't have to be all consuming, right? I can move them aside and go, but that has nothing to do with how I'm going to act, with how I'm going to proceed, with how I, with the mission that I'm on to help, my kids and Shorty, because that's the next ring out, right? And if you didn't have kids, then then you move right out to that shield lock ring, and then that's where you start. And that's now the relationship that you first focus on. That's the next plate, right? So so how do you spin that better? And
Yeah. If the rings in the concentric are like teeth in your head, the fact that you're missing one doesn't mean you stop chewing. I mean,
I don't think I've heard you say that before.
Very beautiful analogy.
yeah, you're right. I mean, it's
I
just
can picture that.
right. I mean, it's not, it's that's just the way it is. Now, you can always, I guess, do something about getting a wife, although I'm not sure that that's the wise way to look at it.
Swipe right.
Right. And I guess you can always produce more shorties if you have not done something to your body that makes you incapable of doing so. So all the relationships on the Concentrica are to some degree within our grasp. But there might be a season where you don't have one. You might be out of work.
Yeah.
Right. You might have a season where you're shield locked. In fact, most guys do not have functioning shield locks, I don't think.
And it's funny, I threw something in the, there's a channel on the Nation Slack that I did not know existed until I got
Ah.
automatically added to it upon my 50th birthday. There's a Respectables channel out there for old
Finally.
men. I know, right? Can't believe it took this long. Or how long it's been there, I actually don't know. But I just threw out in there, and I said, hey, how many of us old guys, have shield locks, and particularly, how many of us have Whetstones? How many of us are, as these older kind of elder statesmen of F3 Nation, how many of us are actively mentoring guys? And I don't think I've heard. I mean, there was a lot of like, oh well, it's kind of informal. There's a couple guys that I talked to somewhat, this kind of thing. There were a couple that were like, I got kind of one guy that I sort of meet with, every so often or whatever. But but I didn't see anybody saying, no, I have 5 active blades that I meet with on a monthly basis, and I put them through a program and I do a thing. And I was like, what is that?
So one way to look at relationships that are or are not in the Concentrica, another way kind of to sift them out is a relationship can be transactional or it can be transformational. A transactional relationship, obviously is you do this and I'll do that, right? And, the guys on your bowling team or whatever, I don't know, that's transactional. You guys show up, I'll show up, we agree to show up and all that stuff. But the other relationships are not even like that. I mean, the number one, the M relationship is by definition transformational. You transform into something else.
Right.
The sacrificial relationship with your shorties is transformational, right? You're not their father in consideration of them doing something, right? Shield lock, you're in it, you derive something from it, obviously, but you're in it to give something. Whetstone, same. Even Mammon, I'm going to say, even though you're paid to do a job, you hope that by doing your job well, you transform your people around you, you help them grow as better employees. In my case, I hope that I provide legal assistance to people that is transformational. Of course, they pay me to do that, though not always.
Yeah, but you could also do kind of bare minimum, right?
Yeah, right, right.
So
So, but relationships outside the concentric tend not to be that way.
Mm.
You know, uh, and that's one way to look at it. And you can only have so many transformational relationships. I mean, you can only be changed or be changing that many things. You know, so that's one way to look at it. And you may not be able to handle in a season that much. It all depends on your bandwidth and who you are, what you're good at.
Mm. What would we say, so just kind of practically, next steps for a guy who's, I'm divorced, I don't have kids, is the next step, sort of work with SkyQ on figuring out if you should get married again, or
Yeah,
get a
I would
lock,
think.
or what would be our sort of recommendation?
But guys my age that I know, I'll say between 55 and 65. So I'm in the middle of that. Who have
Get a Whetstone maybe?
Well, no, have gotten divorced. All of them, it seems like, have gotten remarried. And or have been in another relationship. Like, I can't think of a single guy married for 25 years, kids are out of the house, wife, for whatever reason they get divorced, where the guy said,
I'm good.
I'm good. I'm done.
Yeah.
I can't think of a single guy like that.
Yeah.
And the guys that I know who found themselves in that position, I'm thinking of two in my head whose wives basically, left for one reason or another. They were besieged. And I wish they were here right now so I could say it certainly isn't their looks, as it would not be for me as well. I mean, I think that if you're a man and you, at least in Charlotte, I don't know what it's like out in Bromaha.
Yeah, it's different in Bromaha for sure.
It's, but men around here don't seem to have too much difficulty,
right?
Finding other women. But that doesn't mean it's good.
Well, it all depends, right? Are you filling a bed or are you filling a hole in your heart? What are you doing? You're like, I don't know, right? But to kind of play on another thing that Dredd said earlier too is that, as a guy's looking for next steps or next practical thing that he could do, or what should he be doing next? Number one, you should be doing whatever God directs you to do. That's what you should do, right? So get that out of your head, because it's not a program and it's not a checklist, right?
Yeah.
So put that aside. However, this is a way that we know, based on experience and lots of other guys doing it this way, that works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to stop just short of saying it is the ideal, right? But only just short of that, because in my mind, for me, right, as I have kind of looked into this and thought about other things and the way that I look at my faith and, and how it lines up, and how Q-Source and all those sorts of things line up with my belief system and all that kind of stuff, I think it's as close to an ideal way of looking at it from a framework perspective, right, as you can get. I mean, it's just a very practical way to put into practice all of these things that I learn from my faith, and these things that I study and these things that I know, that, right. It's given me a really great way. Now, are there times that I go along and I go, I don't know that this fits, 100%. Sure. Of course that there's cases like that. However, because it is so principle oriented and not specific action oriented, I can almost always derive the principle of what is being taught and apply that to my life very easily. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. And so when I go, okay, what's my next step? Well, my next step is ideally, I would find myself another suitable helpmeet. That would be the ideal situation. And I would populate the earth as commanded in Genesis, right? Multiply and replenish. That's what I would do. Ideally. We don't live in an ideal world, so we will compromise and we will adapt to those things. Again, whatever comes out of the barn, right? Mm-hmm. The zebra comes out. But I think that it is whether a guy wants to use it or not, it's up to him, but it is definitely a very practical way of taking principles and applying them to a belief system to help you to live that better. And I think it plays out in the fact that my belief system, right, does slightly differ from Dredd's or from the guys in my show lock or from any number of guys.
Yeah.
But the practical, the application of those principles doesn't really change. It only makes what I'm already doing or the things that I already believe or the things that I'm already, engaged in, it just makes them better by doing it this way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And I think what I have gleaned from sort of the conversations the past few episodes, this would be a good thing to talk to a shield lock about. Find some other guys that have been through this, or find a Whetstone, lean into your faith, and then create the Concentrica for a guy that's divorced with
Dredd.
kids and share it. Right.
Do you hear that? Clearly your work here is done.
But where I kind of want to segue a little bit is because I think what we're all, I don't know if this is society or what is conditioned us to achieve or pursue success or progress. I don't know what you would call that, right? You sort of see this in like in Genesis, right? Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother. God says you're going to be a wanderer, and then the first thing he does is builds a city, right? Which is not really wandering. But it's like kind of in us. But I think, like, how do we define success in this without a program? My mind is just like, I want something to tell me I did a good job. But and it used to be the completed checks in the check boxes.
You did a good job.
Huh? But I don't know that I'm the only
okay.
one. So I don't know. I think sometimes that's where we're looking for the program. And Dredd, I guess the only other thing before I turn it over to you, you have made some comments, I think, in the past about why like email at work is appealing, right? Because I get instant feedback from that email that is like a dopamine hit, and I don't get that from my family. So I would be curious, like, unpack a little bit, like, how do we evaluate our performance without a program is maybe my question.
Well, we do have a program, and it's up to us to use it. But it isn't set out in a series of check boxes, right? So, if you look at the Bible as the program, the operating manual, that's what we're supposed to do. It tells us how to be righteous, how to be right, and it's a C.S. Lewis statement. My job is to do right. Having done right, the rest is up to God. So success is not my goal. Success is the consequence of me being obedient and doing the right thing. And then success occurs or doesn't. But if you seek success, you're going to fail. If you seek to do right, you will succeed. But of course, you have to know what is right. That's why I'm dubious about Bob Dylan's spiritualism, because create your own adventure, create your own righteousness doesn't really provide you with very much guidance. And you will hear whatever you want blowing in the wind, whatever answer you want, you will hear, and ultimately that will not avail you of anything long lasting. So when I do right and still got an outcome that's unwanted, then I can turn to scripture and say, well, I also glory in my sufferings because I know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope. I really wish I didn't have to suffer, but that's where hope comes from. I want hope.
The program, yeah, that's the program.
Right. I want,
the program.
That's right. So that's, to me, that's why a systematic study of whatever you believe in, whatever your belief system is important, whatever it is, and to adhere to that. So you can say at the end of the day, well, actually, I do it in the morning when I get up, and did I do right? What are the components of righteousness? Did I do right? And where I have erred, well, my belief system provides for that. Confess it, be forgiven, try again today. Shake off yesterday, don't worry about tomorrow. Focus on today and do right today. And when that happens, you will find as much worldly success as you ever wanted. You know, I mean, as I was talking about Blade today, and he works in a large corporation. He said, "Man, it's so political, and it's just I'm not really good at political thing." And I said, "You know, his father's a general officer." And I said, "I don't know if your dad ever told you this, but the Army's kind of political too." And he said, "Yeah, oh, yeah." And I said, and for the first, you know, I was in for 9 years, first 6 or 7, I tried to get top block ratings, never did, you know. And, you know, your perception was, well, you have to do your job well, but you have to do a certain amount of ball washing, you know, of your basically your boss's boss to get that top block. And I never did. And I decided at one point I was going to get out of the Army, move on to do something else. And I had about 3 evaluations left before I was done. And I stopped seeking top blocks, stopped my, you know, thumbless efforts to ball wash my boss's boss, and just did my job, and three top blocks right out. Not just doing my job. And then, you know, the last one, I happened to be in Africa. I was deployed. And the colonel had to get me to sign my rating. You had to sign it physically. It'd be a wet signature. And they were evaluated by doing this in a timely fashion. And he happened to be in Africa, and he comes in a helicopter where I was. And he gets out of the helicopter, and I welcome and tell him what we're doing there. And he says, "I need you to sign your OER, your evaluation report." And he hands it to me, and it was a top block. And it was the 3rd one in a row, the only 3 I ever got. And it was the last one I got. And he knew I was getting out of the Army. And I said, "Look, sir, I appreciate this more than you know. And the thought is more important to me than the action, because I'm getting out. It doesn't matter anymore to me." And you know, he's limited. He can't give everybody. He is actually evaluated
only
on
so
his
many top
evaluations.
blocks he gives.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
he's allowed to give.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, that's how numerical it is. Like, so if he had, you know, I was being rated as a major. If he had 15 majors, he could only give 3 top blocks, whatever it was. And he said, that's just one of the reasons why I'm giving it to you anyway. It was such a weird experience, because, like, I said, "You're wasting it on me. One of these other guys could use it. I don't need it. I really appreciate the thought." And he said, "You earned it. And the fact that you don't want it is why you're getting it."
So
And I've
there.
never,
No.
yes, so there. So there, you know, and that, I guess that translates into my, you know, one of my current fascinations with the idea that the only man could be trusted with power is the man who doesn't want it, because he will be the only one who will dispense it with integrity. And, you know, whenever that's one of my little Whetstone things I tweet out, and there'll always be a couple of guys who'll say, could confuse worldly power, which is what I mean with spiritual power. You know, and say, well, you know, we should be seeking spiritual power, God working through us. Yeah, I agree. But that's not what I'm saying.
But I'll
right?
also, and I haven't often thrown in there because I don't feel like arguing with a financial analyst or an engineer, but 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 I often say, like, well, how do you think you get spiritual power, Biggin? By doing right.
Right.
So
Doing right.
You still can't be seeking it in the sense that it's like, I want it for the sake of having it.
Right.
You got to seek it because it's the right thing and because you're trying to do right. So a couple things I want to just kind of tack on to what Dredd was saying. One, he said, the only thing you could do is what's right in front of you right now. And I sent this one out to my family and to a couple of Shield Lock and a couple of the guys, is, it's a Lao Tzu. And that's not an F3 name. That's the actual ancient philosopher, right? But he says, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. If you're at peace, you're living in the present. And I think it's good. And you said, how do you figure out what success is? Now, look, you can achieve goals, candidly, and this may make some people kind of go, what? But I'm not a big goal guy. I don't find that a useful metric for me to improve myself. Because I found for myself that it never fills me. It always just left me empty.
Right.
Because every time I would achieve it, there wouldn't be, and I'd be like, well, that didn't do it either, right? And there's a book that we read as an SLT of F3 Nation called The Infinite Game. It's a Simon Sinek book, the Start With Why guy, and he differentiates in there between a finite game and an infinite game. And I realized, and I read this book a long time ago, and then actually Wait Time mentioned he was reading it. And I was like, I should go back and read that again. So I read it again. I was like, that's exactly it, right? A finite game, something that has a time limit, a certain number of points, right? Football, there is an end to a football game. What's that?
There's an end zone.
Yeah, exactly.
You get a touchdown when you
Point.
get to the end zone, right?
When the time is up, the guy with the most points wins the game.
Right.
But you can't win life. You can't win marriage. You can't win your relationship with your shorties. You can't win your shield lock, right? And so there are games that you're going to play as you grow and develop and live your life as a man that are finite, right? Mm-hmm. There is maybe a time period, certainly in the armed forces, right? There's a certain period of time, and if you don't, make a rank or get promoted, or at least get recommended to make this rank by that time, game over.
So here's
that's kind of deal, right?
here's how they would say it, and I think this is right what you're saying.
Yeah.
We didn't speak in terms of goals. We speak in terms of objectives. So you say, aren't they synonymous? Yeah, they share some attributes. However, if you have an objective, it's not an end zone. In other words, you cross over the goal line, spike the ball, you're done, touchdown. Running out the back of the end zone gets you nothing, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah. So,
I went further. Oh, you get 6 points.
Right.
No, 7.
So, right. So an objective would be, all right, your objective is to seize Hilltop 101. And if you do it, that's not the end, because you look across at the other hilltop, and if the enemy's over there, you go seize that too. That's called a sequel. That's called a sequel. So you have an objective that accomplishes the mission, but if you fail to exploit a sequel, then you're not doing your job. We also had branches. In other words, you're on your way to the objective and you see a potential target alongside on your path, and it's not your objective, but it's related to it, and you exploit that, the sequel. So branches and sequels. But if you thought in terms of goals, you say, I'm just going to achieve that goal and stop.
Yeah.
Not going to see the branch. I hit the end zone. I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
So what they taught us was to not think that way at all. Is to focus, and not even focus, orient.
Yeah.
On your objective to accomplish it, but do not ignore the branches and sequels that arise along the way.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the difference between, again, it's kind of infinite game and whatever, but that's
exactly what it sounds like.
The mission, it's kind of like the mission of F3 is to invigorate male community leadership. That is a 100% unattainable goal. There's no way that we will get 4 billion men on the planet to all become community leaders. It's not possible. As much as we might like to pretend or think that we would, because guess what? Even the guys that are in F3, not all of us are doing it, right? So it is an unattainable thing. It's a thing that you will constantly work for forever and ever, right? And that's why you can't win at your marriage. You can't be like, well, we hit 25 and they gave us the cruise. I got the gold watch. Isn't this it? No, it's not it, right? You can't win. There's no winning, because it is a constant, and in my my belief, it is an eternal proposition. It is a forever proposition. That marriage, that relationship exists beyond the grave, and so it is something that you will do forever and ever. And so if kind of to Dredd's point, like What happens if you're supposed to take this hilltop and then they blow it up and there's no hilltop anymore? Well,
Yeah.
you don't allow for any ability to adapt. You don't allow because that objective is not even attainable anymore. It's gone. So now what? Well, if you don't have a greater mission, if you don't have an infinite cause, if you don't have a thing that you're working for that is bigger than you, bigger than your family, certainly bigger than your mammon, right? If you don't have that, then if those things go away, what do you have?
Right.
And the answer is nothing, right? And that's why, we say there's no Lamborghini-sized hole in a man's heart, because that's never going to fix it. That's never going to fill it. That's why your relationship with your creator and doing right according to that is the only thing that you have. Using your agency to do that is the only thing that you have that is worth anything. Yep. Outside of that, the rest you don't have a whole lot of control over. So you can only ever adapt to it and hope for the best, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's really helpful. And I think some of what I struggle. So like, I'm thinking of the question of, are you accelerating or decelerating? And my first thought is, well, how am I measuring that? but if I don't have goals and I don't have boxes that I'm checking to say the task was completed, then it's really hard to measure that. And so then I go sort of down that path. But what I also think I'm learning is, in sort of how we're created and based on what you believe, right? We were created to have dominion and to work and to create things. Then sin enters the world. And I think from, the Bible that I read, we're told there's going to be tension. We're going to toil with sort of our relationship with the world and things and other people. And so I think some of that,
by the sweat of your face, saith the KJV.
Yeah. So to me, I think some of it's just like living in that tension. I want so bad for a way to like measure or like just like at the end of the day to be like.
But here's the thing, like there will be any number of finite games that you'll play along the way toward accomplishing your infinite game, or toward not even accomplishing, but toward that end of working constantly in that infinite game, right? So there's nothing wrong with having finite games and goals and things like that to help you to kind of mark progress or whatever along the way. I'm not saying that's no good at all. It doesn't work for me personally, but I'm not saying it's no good. Yeah. I'm just saying that if that's all you're focusing on, then you are forever destining yourself to be an empty man.
Right. And what I would say, what a change I've made this last year is, instead of me making a plan, executing, then getting mad at God when it doesn't go my way, I'm trying to create a plan, take that to God and say, here's what I put together. Is this a line where, show me where you would have some of these things maybe aren't, I shouldn't have these goals. So.
And what I find that, and I would say I do a similar thing. And a lot of times what I find is I go, hey, this is what I'm going to start on. Mm-hmm. And if you'll just go ahead and kind of nudge me and help me fix it along the way, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And that's usually the way it works for me.
There's something about that. I love that you brought that up. Because I think we hesitate, and Dredd, you and I kind of got into this in our conversation about guys not taking risks, and so it's like we hesitate because, I don't know, the goal's not there, or maybe it's not fully baked. But I do think there are a lot of times where we take the first step, right? Step out of the boat. And then God is, at least for me, has been pretty quick to like shut it down if I went the wrong direction. What's been your experience? I would be curious.
Well, I'm the guy who says I'd rather be sorry than safe.
Yeah.
So, by hardwiring, I'm probably borderline reckless in a lot of ways. So, I mean, that's just hardwiring, right? I mean, and I will, I want to think that I'm good at assessing risk, but I usually want people around me that are less
that are a little more risk averse.
Yeah. And sometimes my wife and I get in little spats because I'm blowing sunshine up my six and she's like not letting me do it. I want to and it's good for me to have that, I most always will underestimate the amount of effort something is going to take, uh, or the amount of the likelihood of failure. And of course, since I believe in failure, I say, well,
Yeah.
we might fail at it, you know. Uh, so I, it's very rare that I have regrets about a risk not taken. Very, very rare. Uh, but I want to be clear that that's not because I'm bold in some way. I'm just that way,
Hmm.
you know.
Just the way
I,
that brain
I,
works.
I'm
Is that
just
where
yeah,
like the collision learner concept came
yeah,
from too a little bit? Okay.
yeah. That's how I've always done things, and I mean that's how I learn. And I'm not saying that's for everybody, you
Yeah.
know. Uh, but I will volunteer to do something first. I will jump out there and do it and find out what the heck happens, you know.
For guys that maybe don't know the collision learner thing, you mind unpacking that just briefly if you would?
Yeah, so that was I think when I rotated out of the Nantan position, you know, I decided to sit down and kind of try to put in a systematic way the way I viewed things that I hadn't already written about,
Mm.
you know, from Q source. So like, and the first thing was the minivan Centurion. That was the first thing that I did. Uh, was to say a little more specifically, what is it we do as men?
Mhm.
You know, and that's what the minivan Centurion does. Where do you fit in your in your family, in your community, and in the nation? What are you supposed to do? You know, what does that look like? What were centurions back in Roman times, and
Yeah.
you know, and what did they do, and why were they important? So, you know, I sat down and wrote that all out, and then the second thing I did was the zebra jockey, which is if you say that chaos is uncontrollable circumstance, how do people react to it? By hardwire. So some people seek to control it, try to exert more control. They see chaos, it's uncontrollable. They try to control it. You can see the futility, right? And other people adapt to it. That's an adapter. So a controller and an adapter. Adapter says it is what it is. Question is how I'm going to deal with it. So it's a zebra because if you're sitting outside a barn, you need to get to town and you're waiting for a horse to come out and a zebra comes out, the zebra jockey rides the zebra.
Mhm.
Whereas the controller says, you know, I'm
Must
waiting on a
have
That's not a
horse.
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 This is
Yeah,
not
that's not a
horse.
horse. That's not a horse, right? And so, you know, that's you know, I tried to develop that idea of what that looks like. So you could read, if anybody's been dumb enough to do that, read all of that. You would come away and say, at its heart, it's about agency, about a man, how he continues to have impact, uh, how he deals with the challenges of modern culture. And what I try to always equate it with is the challenges of modern culture are the same as the challenges 2,000 years ago in the life of man. It's just the bells and whistles that have changed.
Yeah. I love it.
You
And
know,
the collision learner piece, just that sort of analogy itself, I think is just sort of the title you give to this idea that the way you learn is by colliding with the world around you.
and
Right. Yeah.
adversity, obstacles, and failure.
Yeah.
You know, that's where everything, every skill I have as a litigator is based on on a mini failure.
Yep.
Some on only a few on a max failure. Uh, you know, almost every single one. And then I think that's true of anybody in any field. I just wanted to be able to say, here's what I learned from that
Yeah.
and hand it off. Here's what I learned from that. Disregard it. Or say I agree with some of it, you know, whatever you want to do.
Yep.
What I don't want to do is be 84 years old and look back and say, you know, I've got so much wisdom to share, and
Yeah.
and
Sure
die.
wish I'd have put that
You know,
someplace.
sure wish I and die. You know, I want to be able to at least say, you know, but one thing my kids cannot say, Dad, you never told us what you think. Now,
We don't know where
one
he
thing-
stood on the issues.
I hope they would say, you never told us what we had to do, you know, other than safety, but, you know, I told them what I believed, starting with faith and all that. And I've left them as young adults to determine for themselves. But I didn't want, when I rejected Christianity until I was in my 40s, but I never knew what it was. And if my children reject my faith system, they're going to do so voluntarily
Yeah. No.
and knowingly, knowingly that I believe these things. I tried to live them out, failed like everybody else, but at least that's what I believed. I was sitting with an older couple that I knew fairly well once. They were in their late 70s, and we were talking about matters of faith. And they were, at least, you know, reported to be Christians. And the husband said, uh, reacting to something I said, well, I'm not sure Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And his wife looked at him and said, I never knew you thought that. They'd been married for 50 years. 50. And I thought, wow, to be married for 50 years and
Have never had that conversation.
I'd never had that conversation. And I just found that to be remarkable.
Yeah.
And I knew this man very well. And he told me many wise things, gave me good advice, but never, as far as I know, reduced his experiences in his life to a systematic manifesto of sorts, you know, a philosophy, I guess. And I'm not really criticizing him for that, because I think, you know, I'm going to say, okay, so I did a self-effacing parenthetical before. With Frank laughed at me when I said, be dumb enough to read what I wrote. I expect people to read what I write because I spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah.
And I welcome the arguments, but I don't write it down for my own, you know, internal gratification. Otherwise, I would not put it on the internet.
Yeah.
My intent is, my belief is that God has given me the gift to communicate, and He's taking me through a course of collision to learn, and I've been able to systematize those lessons in a way that I believe it is helpful to those to whom it is helpful.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying every man is called to do that or is gifted to do it. I obviously not, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I admit to reading most of the content that's on the collisionlearner.com website.
There's a lot on there.
I encourage guys to go look at it.
Yeah.
You know, I would just say, you know, like, for me, I wasn't born to be a fighter, but now's the time I have to learn to keep my head above the water. I got to play with fire, but not get burned. So that's where I'm at.
That sounds like the wisdom of not Geddy Lee.
That is not Geddy Lee.
It's not Geddy Lee. Appreciate it.
Not Geddy Lee.
Another good one in the books.
Yeah.